Hey guys, tonight we begin a new walk through warmth and wonder. The air is still soft with the hush of early morning, and the first fingers of light are just brushing the lake's surface. A gentle wind ruffles the edge of your tunic, and a single ripple slides across the quiet water. You are awake before most, though not alone. Jesus is already there barefoot at the shore, his cloak gathered around his shoulders, looking out at the pale horizon as if waiting for the day to begin with him. He glances back as you approach, not startled, just quietly glad. A slight smile touches his lips. He doesn't speak yet, and you don't either. The silence feels like something sacred, like a prayer that's still being whispered in the dark. You might just wish you could stay here forever. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. There I love seeing this little family of peace spread across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's walk beside Jesus tonight, slowly and quietly. The lake has that glassy look. It only gets in the earliest hours before fishermen cast their nets, before children skip stones or call to each other across the banks. You see a cluster of reeds bowing slightly in the breeze. Somewhere deeper in the thicket, a frog chirps once. Then silence. Jesus is watching the sky. You follow his gaze and see how the colors are already shifting from the deep indigo of night into something like a pearl gray mist. Then a hint of saffron at the edge. Soon, warmth will follow. He turns to you, rubbing his hands together against the chill. It'll be a good day, he says, almost as if telling the sky. You nod. There's no plan, no map, no crowd yet pressing in. Just you and him, and this moment like a blank scroll waiting for something sacred to be written. He begins to walk. You fall in beside him, sandals pressing into the damp shoreline. You can see the faint outline of other feet having passed this way before. Perhaps yesterday, perhaps last week. The tracks of ordinary life. But there's something different about walking with someone who notices things the way Jesus does. He pauses now and then, not just to rest, but to truly look. Once, it's to observe a snail making its slow path across a stone. Another time, it's the pattern of cracked earth near the base of a fig tree. You don't always see what he sees until he gestures to it, and even then, it often takes a moment longer to understand why it matters. People think the kingdom comes like thunder, he says gently, as you both reach a rise, overlooking a field. But sometimes, it's more like dew. You look across the field. In the soft light, droplets shimmer on every blade of grass. You hadn't even noticed they were there. It's the kind of morning where things begin so softly you might miss them. You weren't walking beside someone who reminds you to notice. Mainstream historical fact. In Galilean mornings like this one, fishermen along the Sea of Galilee often set out before dawn to cast nets while the water was still. The calm surface helped spot ripples, and the cooler temperatures preserved the fish once caught. These quiet early hours were not unusual. They were part of the rhythm of daily life. Jesus bends down and picks something from the edge of the path. A seed, so small you almost don't see it. Mustard, he murmurs. They say it starts as the smallest of all. He presses it into your hand, closing your fingers around it. It weighs nothing, but in your palm, it suddenly feels important. A quirky cultural detail. In first century Judea, mustard seeds were often used by rabbis and healers alike, not only as spices or medicine, but as metaphors. Children were sometimes given them as tokens of patience, and midwives placed a few in the corners of birth chambers for blessing. Jesus says nothing more, but he walks on. The sun is rising now in full, its warmth brushing your cheek. You feel it slowly creeping into your bones, steady and sure. There's something about walking this way with no rush, no goal beyond presence that lets your thoughts stretch out like the horizon. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' early walks before the crowds, before the miracles shaped his parables, whether watching farmers sow seed or women knead dough, left impressions deeper than any scroll could offer. Some believe the rhythm of his speech came not from study, but from footsteps taken in the hush between sunrise and morning. The seed is still in your hand. You turn it over, once, gently, and as Jesus walks just a few steps ahead, you know without a doubt that today you'll learn what something so small might mean when it's planted with love. The path gently curves toward the edge of a tilled field. Morning light rolls across furrows in long, golden bands, revealing a patchwork of earth that's been turned and smoothed by practiced hands. The smell of soil rises, still damp from night Dorothy, rich, steadying. Jesus steps to the edge of the field, not intruding, just observing. A farmer farther off is bent low, moving rhythmically, his hand dipping into a pouch of seed and scattering with a wide, practiced arc. The seed flies like a soft flurry, catching the sun for an instant before vanishing into dirt. "Watch him," Jesus says. "You do." The farmer doesn't speak, doesn't even notice you, but there's something sacred in his rhythm, each step a beat, each throw a note. You can almost hear the silent music of sowing. Jesus crouches and runs his hand over the soil at his feet. "Not every seed takes," he says. "Some fall where the ground is thin, some on stone. But still, he scatters them anyway." You nod. It's hard to say whether he's talking about farming or something more. The soil here in Galilee varies wildly. You remember? One field may flourish, while just across a ridge, rocky outcrops steal the roots from every hope. Still, the farmers sow. Still, they believe in the hidden life below. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Judea, sowing was most often done by hand. Broadcasty farmers walking up and down the land, flinging seed evenly across the tilled ground. Plowing often happened afterward, allowing seed to be lightly buried. It was laborious, dusty, and deeply communal work. Whole families might join the effort. Jesus picks up a small clod of soil and crumbles it between his fingers. "It's always surprising," he says, "which ones grow and which don't." You sit beside him on a low stone. A bird flutters overhead and lands nearby, its eyes sharp and curious. It hops once, then again, pecking at a loose grain. Another bird joins, then two more. Some seed feeds the birds. Jesus murmurs, watching them. There's no bitterness in his voice, only recognition. Some things don't root. Some things feed others instead. Nothing is wasted. He brushes his hands off and stands again. You walk together along the outer edge of the field, where wildflowers sneak through the stones and the breeze carries the scent of crushed fennel underfoot. "Did I ever tell you about the mustard seed?" he asks, suddenly. You shake your head. You'd think of the one still resting in your pouch. It's tiny, too small to bother with. Some say, but if it finds good ground, it doesn't just grow, it becomes a place. He gestures as though outlining invisible branches. A home for birds, a shade for children, a shelter in the field. A quirky cultural detail. In Jewish tradition, mustard was considered invasive. Even unruly could take over a garden if left Rabbinic rules often advised against planting it too close to other crops. Yet Jesus speaks of it not as nuisance, but as haven. A subtle reversal that turns caution into comfort. You picture it now, small yellow flowers stretching toward the sky. Bees tumbling between them. Branches so tangled even the sun plays hide and seek. People expect big things to start big, Jesus says. But sometimes, the truest power begins quiet. He points to a small patch of soil where someone has marked a furrow with a crooked stick. "That one's new," he says. You both crouch to see it better. No sprout yet, just damp earth. But Jesus lingers there, brushing away a bit of pebble from the edge. Historians still wonder whether he ever planted crops. You think to yourself, whether he worked the fields as a young man, or helped till the neighbors' hillside gardens before his teaching began. There's no answer. But the way he touches the ground now makes you believe he did. That his knowledge isn't borrowed, it's lived. He rises slowly. The field opens out in front of you, wide, welcoming, waiting. The wind picks up, brushing the grainy soil into tiny spirals. A few seeds lift and dance in the current, carried somewhere beyond the fence line. Jesus watches them go. Even when you don't know where they'll land, he says, you cast them anyway. You nod again, because you understand, in this moment, that the kingdom is not a place to reach. It's a practice, a scattering, a trust. You and Jesus continue walking, past the field. The land dips into a narrow grove of fig trees. Their broad leaves sway gently, and the shadows beneath are cool. One tree has a twisted trunk, bent with age and fruit. A boy sits nearby with a sling in his lap and fig juice on his fingers. He waves. Jesus waves back. And you understand something without needing to ask. Some seeds grow into trees, others into moments. This quiet walk by tilled earthies, already rooting in your heart. The fig grove hushes the wind, drawing you into its soft quiet. Each tree offers a canopy of wide, dappled shade, their branches swaying gently in the morning light. The boy who waved is now climbing one of the older trees, nimble as a squirrel, balancing easily on thick limbs that have stood longer than any house in the nearby village. Jesus watches him with a soft smile. "Fig trees, remember," he says, stepping over a low root that curves like a sleeping animal. "They keep growing, even if left alone. They don't need much." You duck beneath a branch and walk beside him. He places a hand on the tree's trunk, fingers resting lightly on the bark. Their roots can stretch down and down, past stone, past dryness, past years without rain. That's why they survive. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Judea, fig trees were prized not only for their fruit, but also for their resilience. They thrived in the rocky soils of the hill country and produced 2 crops a yearly, figs in spring and a fuller harvest in summer. Their presence was a sign of a stable, enduring household. Jesus plucks a leaf and rubs it between his fingers. "Not every fruit ripens at once," he says. "You check one branch, and there's nothing. Another, and it's sweet with waiting." He glances at you, like people. You smile at that. The boy in the tree calls out something about a cluster he can't reach. Jesus nods, walks over, and gives the trunk a gentle shake. A few figs tumble down, soft thuds in the underbrush. The boy cheers. You can't help but laugh. "I was once that boy," Jesus says quietly, "climbing trees, hoping." You sense something else in his voice, a memory just beneath the surface, unspoken but vivid. You move deeper into the grove. Beneath one particularly old tree sits a woman with a woven basket in her lap. She is sorting figs, some bruised, some perfect. Her hands are quick, practiced, kind. She looks up as you approach and offers you one with a knowing nod. It's warm from the sun and tastes like honey and dust, a quirky cultural detail. It was common in Galilee for families to dry figs on flat rooftops or stone slabs, preserving the sweetness for winter months. Dried figs were a staple in every household, easy to carry, nourishing on the road, and offered often to travelers as a sign of welcome. Jesus thanks the woman with a quiet gesture, then continues on. You walk behind him through a clearing where the grove thins into scattered brush. A few olive trees grow farther apart here, their trunks knotted in silver. The leaves whisper with every breeze. "Have you noticed?" he says. "How often I talk about trees?" You nod. He has. Some people think the kingdom is a thunderclap, something loud, immediate. But look, he points to the root of a sapling pushing up through a rock's crevice. Sometimes it's this. You crouch beside it, watching the tiny stem tremble in the wind. So small, you might have missed it had he not shown you. Historians still wonder how deeply Jesus' parables were tied to his environment. You think, were they theological poetry, or simply what he saw each day? Figs, fields, vines, soil. Here, looking at that fragile root finding its way through stone, the answer doesn't seem to matter. The story is already speaking. Jesus kneels beside the sapling and presses a little dirt toward its base, steadying it. He says nothing, but you hear everything. The path begins again beyond the clearing, winding through tall grass that whispers at your knees. Somewhere nearby, a cicada begins its slow, buzzing song. Jesus doesn't hurry. You don't either. There's something about this walk, this quiet threading through trees and field and wild, something that makes the world feel soft, tender, known. A place where parables grow from the ground. You pass a crumbled wall, vines climbing across its stones, and a faded piece of cloth caught on a thorn. A bird nest rests in one of the crevices, and Jesus pauses to look inside. Just a few tiny feathers and a curled shell fragment remain. And you understand again he's not just talking about birds. Not really. Everything here speaks if you know how to listen. Every tree, every root, every fig that falls too soon. The grove opens one last time to a wide stretch of dry earth, dotted with tufts of wild mustard. Their yellow flowers flash like coins against the muted green, bright and defiant. Jesus stands in the center of them and turns toward you. "So small," he says, "but strong." He lets the wind carry his words. You stand beside him and breathe. Jesus plucks a single mustard flower and rolls its stem gently between his fingers. The bloom is barely wider than a fingernail, delicate and simple, yet he holds it with the care of something precious. You watch his hands that shaped wood, that healed wounds, that now cradled this quiet thing. "It's a weed," some would say, he murmurs, "but it's the first color in every forgotten field." You walk through the patch together. The mustard plants grow wild here, untended, spreading along the dry slope like a soft wave of sunlight. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Galilee, wild mustard was a common plant, sometimes cursed. Though its seeds were tiny, its roots spread quickly, and its stalks could reach shoulder height. Farmers debated its place in their fields. Useful for seasoning and oil, but troublesome in a vineyard, it became a living metaphor for disruption and surprise. Jesus stops and kneels. He parts the leaves with care, revealing a mustard seed resting in the cracked soil. He doesn't pick it up. He simply watches it. It's the smallest thing, he says. But when it grows, you finish the sentence for him in your mind. It becomes more than anyone expects. You remember hearing the parable before, perhaps told from a pulpit or read in a quiet chapel. But here, standing beneath the open sky, surrounded by the very plants it describes, it doesn't feel like metaphor, it feels like memory. The air is warm now, the sun higher in the sky. A few bees dip between the mustard blossoms, their wings barely audible over the sound of wind moving through grass. Jesus shades his eyes with one hand and looks across the field. Do you know why I tell stories like this? He asks. You shake your head, so that people will remember them when they see the same plants again. I say mustard seed, and it stays in their hands. They can't forget. A quirky cultural detail. Teachers in Jesus' day often used what we might call environmental parables, lessons tied to familiar objects, a lost coin, a vineyard wall, a broken jar. These objects weren't merely props, they were anchors. Students would see the world and hear the story again, even without the teacher present. Jesus moves forward again, stepping carefully between the plants, and you follow. There's a stillness in this field that wraps around your thoughts. It's not just quiet, it's held, as if the wind and the land and even the weeds understand something deeper than words. He points to a spot where the mustard flowers give way to an open patch of bare ground. That's where the path will be, he says. You squint. There's no path, you reply gently. There will be, he says. Someone always finds one. You look again, and somehow you believe him. You continue walking until the earth begins to slope downward. The mustard fades behind you, replaced by tufts of dry thyme and patches of wild barley. The scent shifts brighter, sharper, herbal. You brush your fingers against a cluster of thyme blossoms, and their fragrance clings to your fingertips. Jesus notices and smiles. In the bread, remember, he says, you do. You remember the courtyard oven, the soft hiss of dough against stone, the way time and heat could make a room feel like blessing. You walk beside him in silence for a while, each of you lost in different memories. Maybe, maybe not. The slope ends at a ridge, and beyond it lies a cluster of stones too deliberate to be random, too weathered to be recent. Someone, long ago, marked this place. A shrine, perhaps. A resting point, a sign that someone once passed through and found something worth remembering. Jesus kneels and sets a small rock beside the others, not because he must, just because it feels right. He stays there for a moment, fingers resting lightly on the stones. Then he speaks, but not to you. Let the kingdom come like this, he whispers. You say nothing, because what would you say? The stones are warm in the sun. The wind carries no answers, only presence. And in that moment, you understand something. The kingdom isn't far off. It isn't loud. It doesn't always arrive with trumpets or fire. Sometimes it begins in the quiet placing of a stone beside another. Historians still wonder how Jesus' understanding of the kingdom evolved from fire and judgment to seeds and leaven to presence and peace. Was it strategic storytelling or the unfolding of something deeper inside him? You look at him now, his sandals dusted, his brow lined with thought, his shoulders relaxed in the morning. Aaron, do you think maybe it was both? The wind shifts again. You begin to walk, slowly. The land rises and falls like breath, and every step feels part of something older. A pilgrimage maybe, a parable in motion. Jesus turns back to you briefly. Even mustard seeds get lost in the wind sometimes, he says. You nod, but they still grow. The trail narrows as it curves around a grove of fig trees, their limbs wide and heavy with unripe fruit. A cicada hums from somewhere unseen, and the sound folds into the rhythm of your steps. Jesus walks just ahead, quiet again, his shadow stretching long across the ground. You're not sure how far you've walked, but your body feels the distance. It's not exhaustion, though it's more like settling into something natural, something the body was always meant to do. He pauses beside one of the fig trees, rests a hand against the trunk, and looks upward into its canopy. There's a story in every tree, he says, but fig trees, they keep secrets. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Judea, fig trees were deeply symbolic. Not only a vital source of food, their slow and steady growth was often associated with peace and security. The phrase "to sit under your own vine and fig tree" meant to live in contentment, free from fear. Jesus plucks a leaf and twirls it between his fingers. When the leaves come out, he says softly, "You know the summer is near." You've heard him say that before in one of his teachings, but this time it feels less like a warning and more like a remembering. He crouches and draws a line in the dirt with the fig stem, a lazy arc, like the edge of a horizon. "Do you see it?" he asks. "You're not sure what you're supposed to be seeing." He smiles anyway, even if not yet. That's all right, a quirky cultural detail. In village life, children often learned to climb fig trees before they could read. The fruit was sweet, and the branches low. Some families would mark the seasons by which branch bore fruit first and whisper little rhymes about which ones to avoid, in case of wasps or snakes curled in the shade. You sit for a while at the edge of the grove. The ground is soft here, shaded. A small breeze stirs the grasses, and for a moment it feels like even the earth is exhaling. Jesus leans back against the tree. "This parable I told," he says, "about the mustard seed. It's not just about faith, it's about patience." You glance over at him. "So much of this," he continues, "depends on people believing something before they see it, planting without knowing what will grow." He looks down at the fig in his hand, still unripe, still waiting. It's easy to believe when everything blooms. You feel the truth of that settle into your chest. The sun rises higher, the shadows of the leaves above you stretch and shift. Time passes, uncounted, and still he speaks no more. He doesn't need to. The quiet has filled in the spaces between his words. He finally pushes off from the tree and starts walking again. You follow, leaves crunching underfoot. The trail opens into a small clearing, nothing remarkable at first glance, just earth and dust and scattered pebbles. But Jesus kneels again, draws a shape in the dirt. Not a fish, not a cross, not a Hebrew letter, just a tiny circle, and then a larger circle around it. "You think you're small?" he says without looking up, "but you're surrounded by more than you'll ever know." You crouch beside him and run your fingers through the drawing. The dust clings to your skin, the circled blur. He watches the smudging happen and doesn't stop you. "That's all right too," he says. Even blurred things carry meaning. Historians still debate how many of Jesus' parables were preserved word for word and how many evolved through retelling. Some believe the parable of the mustard seed was among the earliest shared in many towns, even before formal discipleship. Perhaps it was because it was short, or because it felt like something people had already lived. You rise, and he does too. From here, the road is brighter, sloping gently toward a long ridge that cuts across the land like a sleeping arm. Jesus walks beside you now. Not ahead, not behind. The two of you pass a large flat stone, half buried in earth. Someone has scratched a symbol into its surface, a rough spiral, now worn soft by time and weather. He pauses, brushes away a layer of dust, and lays his palm flat against it. "I like spirals," he says. "You tilt your head. They never really end. Just open." The wind picks up a little, tugging at the edge of his cloak. He doesn't pull it tight, he lets it flutter. You walk on, and as you do, the earth feels different beneath your sandals, like it knows you're listening now, like it's speaking to. The air smells of sun-warmed stone and distant herbs. Somewhere, a bird calls out a long, low whistle, echoing through the valley. Jesus glances upward. Even the birds know. You don't ask what they know, because somehow you feel it too. The path drifts alongside a ridge now, high enough for you to see across the valley. A patchwork of fields lies below, some golden with grain, others freshly turned and rich with soil. In the distance, a few shepherds move slowly, their figures small against the landscape. A child runs after a goat, arms wide, laughing. The sound doesn't reach you, but you feel it anyway. Jesus stops beside a crooked olive tree and leans into the breeze. His cloak lifts slightly, revealing the curve of his shoulder, the line of dust along the edge of his garment. He closes his eyes. You stand next to him, saying nothing. "Hey guys, tonight we walk together under Galilee's waking skies. You might just wish you could stay here forever. So, before you get comfortable, Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing this little family of peace spread across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's walk beside Jesus tonight, slowly and quietly. The leaves shimmer, catching the early sun. This hill, Jesus murmurs, was once used for threshing. He runs a hand along the old stone edge of a long collapsed platform. Mainstream historical fact. In 1st century Judea, threshing floors were often built on elevated ground to catch the wind. After harvest, grain was brought up to these floors, where oxen would trample the stalks. Then, using winnowing forks, workers tossed the mixture into the breeze to separate chaff from grain. Jesus kneels and scoops a bit of earth into his palm, letting it sift through his fingers. So much of what we do, he says, depends on wind we cannot see. A quirky cultural detail. In some Galilean villages, children would chase bits of chaff as it swirled down the hillside during harvest. It became a game catching what was meant to be discarded. Laughing as the breeze claimed it again, you sit beside him. The sun is warm now, but the breeze keeps the heat soft. He draws another shape in the dust, this time a small seed. Not with perfect lines, just a suggestion, an impression. Mustard, he says. You raise your eyebrows. It's tiny. That's the point, he replies. This, if you plant it, becomes something larger than you'd expect. He brushes the image away with the side of his hand. The kingdom of heaven, he adds, is like this. His voice is calm, not a declaration, not a sermon. Just a seed of an idea. Historians still wonder how often Jesus used everyday objects like seeds and stones to illustrate his teachings in casual moments. Was the parable of the mustard seed born on a hillside like this, or crafted later, refined through repetition? Some scholars argue it wasn't just teaching, it was remembering, memory shaped into metaphor. Jesus lies back against the ground, arms folded beneath his head. People think power needs to be big, he says, staring up into the clear sky. But it doesn't. You glance around at the scattered trees, the silence, the breeze. Power, he adds, can be gentle. The words hang there. You lie beside him. For a long time, neither of you speaks. The wind rustles through the grasses. Somewhere, far below, a dog barks once, and the sky goes on stretching wider and wider, as if to say, there's still more to come. Jesus turns his head toward you. Would you plant something? He asks. If you knew, you'd never see it grow. You hesitate, then nod. He smiles. That's enough. The light shifts again, becoming fuller, more golden. A pair of birds land nearby, pecking softly at the soil. Jesus sits up, watching them. He says nothing, but his eyes follow their movements with quiet attention. You think of all the times he's looked at people that way with the same quiet care, the same willingness to wait for something small and beautiful to reveal itself. He stands, dusts himself off. Let's go. You rise and follow. Down the hill, the path becomes steeper. Dust rises around your ankles, and the scent of wild thyme drifts past in the breeze. It smells like something old and kind. As you walk, you feel something settle inside you, not certainty, but peace. A kind of trust that doesn't need answers yet. That can wait. The mustard seed, he said. So small, but planted anyway. The hill gives way to a winding path flanked by low shrubs and dusty stones. The breeze quiets as the path descends, and the sound of your footsteps becomes more distinct. Crunches and scuffs, the soft rhythm of sandals on dry earth. Jesus walks ahead of you now, hands behind his back, head tilted slightly as if listening to something in the silence. His pace is unhurried, and you fall into step behind him, content to follow without needing to speak. You pass a terraced grove, where rows of fig trees lean gently toward the valley. The fruit is still small, hard, green knots at the ends of thick stems. The leaves trembled faintly in the morning light. Not yet, Jesus says, touching a leaf without plucking anything. But soon. Mainstream historical fact. Fig trees were a staple of Judean agriculture and deeply symbolic in Jewish tradition. Their seasonal cycle was well known: early buds in spring, first fruit in summer, then a second harvest late in the year. In scripture, figs often represented peace, abundance, or spiritual health. Jesus pauses at the edge of the grove, where a cluster of wild mustard grows tall now, with yellow blossoms catching the light like tiny flames. He crouches and touches one of the blooms. See, he he says softly. It doesn't look like much, but look how it spreads. A quirky cultural detail. Wild mustard was common in Galilee and often considered a nuisance. It grew quickly, overtook fields, and was hard to remove. Farmers respected its persistence, but many resented it, calling it stubborn. Still, some households collected its tiny seeds to grind into pungent spice or oil for lamps. Jesus picks one stem and twirls it gently between his fingers. The tiny petals flutter like wings. Most people try to get rid of these, he says, but I think they're a reminder. You're not, though you're not quite sure of what. That something small, he continues, can take root in places you wouldn't expect, in cracks, in corners, even in hearts. The two of you walk again, the path curving beneath a limestone outcrop. Above, a hawk glides silently across the sky, casting a slender shadow across the ground. Jesus watches it, shading his eyes. He says nothing. You walk together in that hush, carried forward not by purpose, but by peace. At a bend in the road, a man waits with a small cart, shaded beneath a crude awning of reeds and rope. He greets Jesus with a smile, and they exchange quiet words in Aramaic. The man lifts the cloth from his cart to reveal bundles of herbs thyme, hyssop, mint, and a small sack of dried mustard seed. Jesus takes the sack and weighs it gently in his hand. He offers the man a few copper coins, but the man refuses, pressing his hand over Jesus's instead. You see the silent meaning pass between them. A gift, not a transaction, a gesture of trust. Jesus bows his head in thanks, and the man nods before turning his cart around and continuing up the hill. Historians still wonder how often local villagers gave Jesus food, herbs, or other daily things without expecting payment. Some argue it was common in small communities, an exchange of hospitality and quiet reverence. Others believe it hints at something deeper, a recognition, even then, of something sacred. Jesus hands the sack to you. Carry this. You nod and sling it carefully over your shoulder. It's heavier than you expected. You both continue walking, the sun higher now, casting sharper shadows across the road. A dry branch snaps beneath your heel, startling a pair of doves from the nearby brush. Their wings beat hard, then vanish into the sky. Jesus watches them disappear. Everything that grows, he says softly, first falls. You glance at him. He shrugs. A seed must fall before it becomes anything. You walk a while in silence. The road dips and widens, opening into a small flat clearing where travelers sometimes rest. Smooth stones ring the space, and a few olive trees offer shade. Jesus chooses a spot near one of the trunks and sits. You do the same. He opens the sack and pours a small pile of mustard seed into his palm. So small, he murmurs again. He picks one up and places it in your hand. It's like holding a freckle, something that might vanish if you breathe too hard. Now imagine, he says, this becoming a tree. You try to picture it, how such a speck might become something tall, strong, generous, a place for birds, a resting place for shade, a source of shelter. You look at the seed again. It still looks impossibly small, but somehow ... you believe him. The breeze picks up again, and a few of the seeds roll gently from his palm into the dust. He watches them scatter without trying to gather them. Let them go, he says. Some will grow. That's enough. You sit in that stillness, watching the golden light play across the ground, and for a moment, you understand what he means. The breeze lingers longer than you expect, rustling the olive leaves and brushing past your ears like a whispered song. You and Jesus sit in the clearing a little while longer, neither of you speaking. The mustard seeds lie where they fell, speckling the dust like crumbs of promise. Jesus eventually stands, brushing the creases from his robe. You rise too, feeling the gentle weight of the sack still slung over your shoulder. He offers you a smile that doesn't ask for anything in return, and the two of you begin to walk again eastward, along a narrower path now, lined with tufts of dry grass and thorn. You walk past a stone boundary wall, low and ancient, built by hands long forgotten. A few wildflowers have pushed their way through the cracks between the rock's red poppies, pale chamomile, the same yellow mustard flowers you saw earlier. Jesus points to them without stopping. They don't ask permission, he says. They just blew. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Galilean farmers used dry stone walls to mark their fields and pastures. These simple structures, stacked without mortar, kept animals in and travelers out. Over time, Wind and seed transform them into unlikely gardens, with plants taking root in the smallest spaces. You reach a narrow rise, where the land briefly flattens and opens to a view of the valley below. The Sea of Galilee is far off, not yet visible, but the air carries a coolness that hints at water. Jesus rests his hand on a gnarled tree trunk, tracing the ridges of its bark. "Let me tell you something," he says, tilting his head toward you. "There was once a man who scattered seed upon the ground." His voice lowers, as though it might unsettle the earth to speak too loudly. He slept, he woke, he waited, and somehow, even while he did nothing, the seed sprouted and grew. You listen as the wind picks up slightly, ruffling your sleeves. He continues. He didn't know how. He didn't control it. The earth did what it does. First the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. He looks down at the seeds still clinging to the folds of his robe. "That's what the kingdom is like," he says. "Not a storm, not a throne, a seed." A quirky cultural detail. Many Galileans used proverbs drawn from farming to pass on wisdom. These sayings often carried double meanings, part practical, part spiritual. Children would memorize them as part of their learning, their meanings ripening slowly with age and experience. Jesus bends to pick up a small clod of dirt, crumbling it gently in his palm. You see the fine texture, the way moisture darkens its edge. "People want lightning," he says softly, "but this quiet becoming is just as holy." You keep walking together, feet brushing the dry weeds. At a bend in the road, you pass a well-oiled, moss-ringed, its pulley creaking faintly in the wind. A clay jar sits beside it, half full. You glance at Jesus. He shakes his head with a small smile. "Drink, if you like," he says, "but the water you're really thirsty for can't be drawn in a jar." You crouch beside the well, feeling the cool air rise from its mouth. You don't drink, not yet. You just listen to the soft drip far below, to the creak of the wood, to your own breath, slowing again. When you stand, Jesus has already started down the next slope, waiting a few paces ahead. You join him without needing to ask where you're going. The light shifts slightly as clouds drift overhead, softening the warmth. You pass a patch of cracked earth, where the grass no longer grows and the stones lie bare. Jesus pauses, toeing the edge with his sandal. "Not every seed finds good soil," he says, voice quiet again. You think of the seeds scattered earlier. Some had rolled into crevices, others had vanished into the brush. "Some get eaten," he continues. "Some dry up, some get choked." He looks at you, eyes gentle. "But some ... some grow." Historians still wonder how many of Jesus' parables were shaped by the landscape itself, how many turns of phrase came from things he touched, walked past, noticed. Was the mustard seed something he saw while walking? Did the soil remind him of how people listen, some with depth, some with thorns? Was it all sermon, or just memory? You and Jesus move past the bare patch and enter a greener space, where low trees offer shade and the ground softens. The mustard sack shifts slightly against your side, and you touch it without thinking. Ahead, a bird sings. Just one long note, then silence. Jesus stops. He turns toward you, not with instruction, not with warning, but with wonder. "You know," he says, "you only need one seed." You look down at the road. A single mustard seed has slipped from the sack and rests between your sandals, tiny, unassuming, alive. You stoop gently and lift the tiny seed between your fingers. It's lighter than you expect, almost nothing at all. But the way Jesus looks at it, the way the world seems to still around it, you feel its weight in a different way. He doesn't say anything more, just watches as you tuck the seed carefully back into the sack, as if returning a pearl to a hidden place. The road narrows again. Thorn bushes grow thick on either side, their branches crisscrossing like tired hands. Jesus walks just ahead of you, his robe brushing the green, occasionally catching on a bramble. He doesn't flinch. He simply untangles, continues. Not far ahead, the land opens once more into a dry terrace. Ancient olive trees twist up from the earth, here some hollow, some gnarled, all weathered. Their bark is grey and cracked like the surface of an old scroll, their roots exposed and clinging to the hillside. Jesus places a hand against one of the trunks, his palm resting flat on its roughness. He whispers something too soft to catch. Then he steps back and motions for you to come closer. "This one has been here longer than memory," he says. "Mainstream historical fact. Many olive trees in Galilee were centuries old, some believed to have been planted during the time of the Second Temple. Their fruit sustained generations, their wood carved into bowls, beams, and prayer tools. Farmers pruned them with care, often speaking to the trees as if they were elders of the land. You reach out and touch the tree as he did. The bark is warm from the sun, textured like woven rope. You wonder how many hands have rested, hear how many prayers, how many thoughts. Jesus walks to a flat stone nearby and sits. You follow, brushing a few dry leaves away before settling beside him. You know, he says, the kingdom isn't loud. He lifts a handful of soil, letting it run slowly through his fingers. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or banners. It doesn't push its way forward or shout for attention. The last grains of soil fall from his hand, silent. It starts in the smallest things, a quirky cultural detail. In some Galilean homes, parents would tell their children that angels hid in seeds, not to be worshipped, but to remind them that even the unseen was sacred. A cracked grain could hold more than food, it could hold a future. Jesus leans back on his hands, looking out across the grove. Have you ever seen a mustard plant when it's full grown? He asks. It's wild, tangled, bigger than anyone expects. Birds come and make nests in it. Farmers try to control it, but it doesn't listen. You smile. The image is unexpected, this unruly plant becoming sanctuary. People think the kingdom should be tidy, he says. But maybe ... maybe it should surprise us. You glance upward, and sure enough, a small bird flits from one branch to another, settling near the crown of a tree. Its feathers catch the light soft russet, like firelight through clay. Jesus watches too. That's the thing about seeds, he says. They make room for more than just themselves. You sit a while in silence, the only sounds being wind in the leaves and the occasional tap of an olive falling to the ground. Then Jesus stands and begins walking once more. You file, stepping over roots and sun-baked earth. The sun is high now. Its light falls straight and strong, casting thin shadows at your feet. You both move downhill, toward a small, dry-streamed. Stones scatter the path, each one round and smooth from seasons of water and time. Jesus crouches beside one and runs a finger along its edge. These, remember, he says. You kneel beside him. Water, he adds, isn't always loud either, but it shapes everything. He places the stone on your palm. It's warm and light. You slip it into your satchel. Ahead, the stream curves beneath a natural arch of rock, and Jesus leads the way beneath it. The air cools briefly. The light dims. For a moment, you walk in shadow. He turns his head slightly and speaks again. The seed doesn't worry. You blink, adjusting to the light. It just ... grows. Historians still wonder whether parables like the mustard seed were based on actual experiences from Jesus' daily life. Some scholars believe he chose his metaphors not just for it, but because they were part of his own spiritual rhythm, his own way of watching the world's quiet unfolding. You emerge from the shadows into sun again, and Jesus stops. He tilts his head back, looking at the sky, bright, endless, blue as river water. You don't need to understand it all, he says. You just need to begin. Jesus walks ahead now, just a few steps farther than before. Yet it feels like he's leading you deeper, not just into the land, but into something quieter, older. The path is narrow and lined with tall grasses that brush against your legs, soft and tick. A dragonfly lifts from a blade, hovering momentarily in a shimmer of sunlight, then darts away. The seed is still on your mind. You reach for the satchel, press your hand to its side where the stone lies still, and imagine the seed nestled there too, waiting, trusting, whole. Jesus slows again, turning to the left where a low field spreads out. Wild mustard is growing here, golden and ragged and wind-tossed, taller than you expect. Some stalks lean under the weight of their pods, while others reach upward, their blossoms like bright hands raised to heaven. He steps into the field. You follow. The plants part gently as you walk. Bees hum lazily near the blossoms. The scent is dry and peppery, sharp in a way that makes you inhale more deeply. Jesus pauses beside one of the tallest stems and rests his hand against it. This, he says simply, is the kingdom. Mainstream historical fact. In first century Judea, mustard was considered both a weed and a medicine. It grew wild, often invading fields and gardens, but its seeds were used to treat ailments like toothache, indigestion, or fatigue. Farmers knew it was hard to control once planted. It spread fast, nearly impossible to uproot completely. You look around. The mustard is everywhere, tangled, flourishing, undeniably alive. It doesn't ask for permission to grow. Jesus says it doesn't follow lines or wait for approval. It finds the cracks, the forgotten corners, the space no one thought to bless. A breeze moves through the field, and the mustard plants sway together in response like congregants in a temple made of sunlight and dust. You both kneel among the stalks, the earth warm beneath your knees. Some people want heaven to come, like thunder, Jesus says, plucking a mustard pod and rolling it between his fingers. But maybe it begins like this. A quirky cultural detail. In village tales, parents sometimes warned children not to scatter mustard seeds too carelessly. They believed the seeds had a mischievous spirit growing where you didn't expect, outpacing your plans. Some even said mustard could find your secrets, rooting itself in the shadows of what you tried to ignore. Jesus opens the pod and lets the seeds fall into his palm, tiny, almost invisible from where you sit. This is how it starts, he says. One small act, one quiet truth, one word of kindness no one saw but God. You press your fingers into the soil beside you. It crumbles and smells of clay and green. What if you believed, he asks, that even your smallest love could grow? You sit with that thought. Let it settle. Let it find space within you like a seed finding earth. Then Jesus leans back, resting on his elbows, gazing at the sky. And what if you never saw it bloom? He adds, voice softer now. Would you still plant it? You don't answer, but he doesn't seem to need one. Silence settles over you both, rich and full. Then Jesus speaks again. The kingdom of God, he murmurs, is like a mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it grows, he turns to you. It becomes a tree, and the birds of the air come and make their nests in its branches. You picture it, the tree, the birds, the shelter made from something no bigger than a grain of sand. Historians still debate whether mustard seeds were ever planted deliberately in Galilean gardens, or if Jesus used them precisely because they were wild, uninvited, and impossible to contain. Some scholars argue it was a parable not of comfort, but of rebellion of a kingdom that disrupts, spreads, and can't be fenced in. Jesus stands again, brushing his hands clean. You rise too, brushing your knees. The two of you leave the field behind, but the golden glow of it clings to your eyes, like sunlight painted on the inside of your eyelids. A few steps later, Jesus reaches into his satchel and retrieves a small clay flask. He offers it to you. Water cool, slightly sweet, the kind drawn from an early morning well. You drink and pass it back. The path rises again, turning toward a hillside where the wind moves faster. From here you can see the distant edges of farmland, rows of barley and grapevines threading across the land like woven fabric. Jesus stops, points to a small bird gliding overhead. She's looking for a place to land, he says. You follow its path as it circles once, then disappears into a tree. Everything, he says, finds its branch, eventually. You nod, not because you fully understand, but because something in your spirit does. The wind presses gently against your face as you and Jesus continue along the hillside, the golden hush of the mustard field still echoing in your thoughts. Down below, the path splits one direction leading toward the village, the other toward the open lands where farmers tend long rows and the world feels a little less familiar. Jesus glances down both ways, then chooses the narrower trail. You follow without question. As always, your sandals catch on small stones, and the air smells faintly of olives, and something metallic, perhaps a memory of last night's storm, still resting in the soil. The sky is a wide canvas now, with no clouds to distract it. You feel exposed beneath it, but not vulnerable, more like invited. You pass a field with a man crouched over young plants. His hands move with practiced rhythm, pulling weeds, shaping the earth. Jesus slows and watches. So do you. Do you think he ever wonders if it's worth it? Jesus asks, Jesus lifts a hand and the man nods in return, a greeting without words. There's a parable in his posture, Jesus says. The way he keeps working, the way he bends and lifts. Every movement carries belief. You walk again, and the ground shifts, less grassy now, more gravel and clay. Jesus tells a story as he walks, his tone calm, the pace of his steps guiding the rhythm. A man scattered seed on the ground. He begins night and day, whether he sleeps or wakes. The seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. You listen, the story unfolding gently. All by itself, the soil produces grain first, the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. You nod slowly, imagining it, and as soon as the grain is ripe, he finishes. He puts the sickle to it, because the harvest has come. You pause, digesting the story like bread. A quirky cultural detail. Children in Galilee often learn parables like these by listening to them recited in marketplaces or near wells. Elders would use pebbles and dirt to illustrate the stages of growth, laying them out in the dust so even the smallest child could understand how something unseen could still be growing. Jesus smiles as if remembering such a moment. He doesn't know how it grows, he says again. That's my favorite part. You tilt your head. Not every truth needs explaining, he adds. Some truths ask for trust, not understanding. The path narrows more, winding between low rock walls stacked without mortar. Dry grasses sprout from the cracks. A lizard darts away, its tail flicking like a green thread. You reach a shaded patch, where fig trees stretch their branches low and wide. Jesus steps beneath them, crouching slightly, and gestures for you to join him. The figs are small and green, not yet ready, but the shade is welcome. You plant a seed, he says, but you don't control the sun. You sit on the ground, cross-legged, and look at your hands dusty now, with a crease of soil still beneath your nails from kneeling in the mustard. Do you think it's growing? You ask softly. That seed in the satchel. Jesus looks at you, eyes warm, and says nothing for a moment. Then, maybe, or maybe it's waiting. Seeds know how to wait. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' parables were entirely original or drawn from the common oral traditions of Galilee. Some phrases he used echo proverbs found in Jewish writings or folk tales, while others seem to emerge with startling freshness. Scholars debate whether his gift was invention or transformation, turning everyday truths into eternal ones. You lie back beneath the fig trees, letting the leaves filter the sunlight into patterns across your face. Jesus lies beside you, one arm folded under his head. For a long while, neither of you speak. You listen instead to birds hopping on branches, to the hush of the wind, to the echo of parables not yet told. It occurs to you that rest, too, is part of the planting. Not everything needs to be done. Not everything needs to be known. And so you breathe, and the breeze answers. You think of the farmer, of the tiny seeds beneath the soil, of the days when nothing seems to happen, and how even those are sacred. Jesus shifts beside you and sits up. You follow. He places a hand on the earth beside his knee and presses gently. It's all here, he says, and somehow you understand. The shade of the fig trees lingers on your skin, even after you step back into the light. The sun is higher now, brushing the tops of the olive trees in soft glints, as if every leaf is trying to speak with a shimmer. You and Jesus walk again, slowly, following a ribbon of path that winds between open land and clusters of stone homes. He seems quieter now, though not with strongest contemplative, as if his thoughts have roots as deep as the parables he tells. You come upon a group of children crouched at the edge of a shallow ditch, poking at something with a reed. They glance up at you, squinting against the light. One girl smiles wide, a gap where her front tooth should be. Jesus stops. What have you found? He asks. The smallest boy lifts a cupped hand, a snail, inching slowly across his palm. The children giggle at its tiny horns and glistening trail. Slow things still move, Jesus says, crouching to eye level. Mainstream historical fact. In Galilean villages, children played with natural object stones, reeds, small animals, and learned by observing adults. Education came through repetition, storytelling, and imitation. There were no formal classrooms for most children, but wisdom was passed through work, worship, and wandering. He thanks the children, stands, and you walk on. The village edge is not far now, a scattering of walls and wooden carts, a lean-to with baskets of onions stacked beneath its eaves, and the low hum of daily life beginning again. You chew on that in silence. The woman goes back to her work, oblivious that her net is now part of a story that will one day circle the world. Jesus walks again, and you trail behind for a moment, watching the light ripple on the net, the way it breathes gently in the breeze. A quirky cultural detail. Nets weren't just used for fishing. Farmers and gardeners in Galilee often repurposed torn nets to protect young plants from birds or pests, especially in the early growing season. The net became a symbol not of conquest, but of protection, stewardship, and hope. You rejoin Jesus as he begins another story, this one, almost like a whisper. There was a merchant, he says, who searched for fine pearls. His voice is steady, like the pull of a tide. When he found one of great value, he went away, sold everything he had, and bought it. He glanced at him. Was that wise? He shrugs gently. Depends who's asking, and what they love. You both fall into quiet again, the kind that feels fuller than speech. The breeze rises slightly, stirring your cloak and pushing tiny dust ghosts across the path. You stop to tie your sandalets, strap worn thinner when you look up again. Jesus is standing at a bend in the path, waiting for you. He doesn't rush you. He never does. You reach him, and he points. A vineyard stretches before you, rows of vines just beginning to show green shoots. The soil between them is dark, turned recently. A man in a wide-brimmed straw hat works the farthest row, moving with a rhythmic grace. Jesus turns to you. The kingdom is like that, he says, like a man who planted a vineyard. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' metaphors were tailored to his audience or consistent across towns. Did he always speak of fields in farming villages, of coins in market towns, or did he carry certain parables with him always, like a favorite story told to different hearts in slightly different ways? Jesus steps off the path and walks a few feet into the vineyard, kneeling to press his fingers into the soil. It's warm, he says. Ready. You crouch beside him. The scent of earth is rich and comforting. He picks up a small stone and rolls it in his palm, then sets it down again. You don't see the roots, he says, but they're always working. There is a pause. The air holds its breath. Faith is like that, he adds. You both stand, brushing dust from your knees. The man in the vineyard doesn't look up, but you sense he knows you're there. Perhaps that's enough. You rejoin the path. The day is leaning toward noon now, and your shadow stretches behind you like a memory. Jesus doesn't speak for a while. You follow him along the vineyard's edge, each step brushing against tall grasses and wild mustard shoots. Then, softly, he says, the kingdom is like a seed so small you could miss it, but once planted, it becomes shelter. You think of the children, the net, the fig tree. You think of the world inside a single story, and as the sun reaches higher into the sky, you know, the mustard seed is not just a lesson, it's an invitation. The air is warmer now. You feel it on the back of your neck, where a strand of hair clings slightly with sweat. The path dips again, threading through fields where rows of barley wave like golden water in the wind. Jesus walks a step ahead, but his pace is slow, inviting. He turns to glance at you. Do you remember, he says, what it feels like to wait? You nod. You remember seasons of longing, prayers unanswered, hands open with nothing to hold. He gestures toward the barley. The earth knows it, he says. It waits all the time. Mainstream historical fact. Barley was one of the staple crops of Galilee in the 1st century, often harvested earlier than wheat. It was hardier, easier to grow in poor soil, and used in bread for both people and animals. Fields of barley, golden and unruly, were a familiar part of everyday life. Jesus steps off the path into the field. He walks slowly between the rows, his fingers brushing the heads of grain. The wind lifts his cloak around his ankles, and for a moment he looks like he belongs here more than anywhere else. You follow him. The stalks bend icily beneath your touch, rough and sun-warmed. Consider the farmer, he says quietly. He plants the seed, then he waits. There's a hush to his voice, as if the barley itself is listening. He doesn't know how it grows in it really. First the stalk, then the head, then the full grain. But it comes, you stop walking, even if he forgets. Jesus adds, the harvest comes. He continues ahead, and you stand still for a breath, surrounded by tall golden grain. The sound of it rustling is soft and constant, like a lullaby. You'll think of times when you've waited for healing, for clarity, for peace, and suddenly the waiting feels less like emptiness and more like planting. A quirky cultural detail. In Galilean households, a handful of barley was often tucked into the folds of a child's clothing during long journeys, a symbol of blessing and provision. It wasn't always meant to be eaten, sometimes just held, a quiet reminder that one day they'd return to the fields. Jesus kneels again, this time to pull a stray weed. It comes up, easily roots tangled with young barley. He holds it up. They look the same, he says. Until the end, you watch him twist the weed between his fingers, then cast it aside. Some things can't be sorted right away, he says. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' audience understood the depth of such parables. Were they coded messages for the future, or reflections of present anxieties, questions about judgment, justice, and the slow unfolding of truth? Jesus stands, brushing dust from his knees. You both return to the path. It curves again, skirting the edge of the field, where olive trees begin to cluster once more. You walk in silence. Then, after a long while, he speaks again. There was a man, he says, who owned a field. You wait. One night, while he slept, someone came and scattered weeds among his wheat. You glance sideways, and when the wheat began to grow, Jesus continues, so did the weeds. He pauses. So his servants asked, "Shall we pull them up?" You weigh again, and the master said, "No, not yet. Wait until harvest, then separate them." You think about that, because you can't always tell. Jesus finishes. Not when things are still growing. There is quiet between you, but it isn't empty. It's full of meaning, of possibility, of the patience required to live among what's unfinished. The trees thicken now, their branches casting dappled shade across the path. A clay water jug rests on a nearby stone, likely left for travelers. Jesus stops, lifts it, and drinks. Then he offers it to you. You drink, and the water is cool and metallic, with a faint taste of clay. It settles into your chest like peace. You continue walking, the light now filtering through the olive leaves above like droplets of gold. The world is quiet, except for the soft rhythm of your sandals and the occasional call of a bird high in the canopy. Then Jesus asks a question so simple, it startles you. "Why do you think I tell these stories?" You blink. "Because they're beautiful." He smiles. "Because truth is heavy," he says, "but stories carry it gently." He bends to pick up a fallen olive branch, its leaves still green, and sometimes, he adds, the seed is the story. You hold that thought as you walk beside him through trees, through light, through time itself. The parables are not puzzles to be solved. They are seeds planted in silence. And one day, you realize they bloom when the heart is ready. Jesus says no more, but his steps are steady, and your own are quieter now. Not because you're tired, but because you're beginning to listen the way seeds do. The path slopes downward now, and the earth beneath your feet feels loose, flecked with pebbles that shift slightly with every step. You and Jesus descend in tandem, moving at the same quiet rhythm. Ahead, the trees part to reveal a low valley, its center scattered with wild flowers and scrubby bushes. You pause for a moment to take it in. The colors are gentle lavender and soft yellow, a dusting of white blossoms catching the light. Bees drone in lazy circles above the blooms, and somewhere nearby, a goat bleats once, then falls silent. Jesus gestures toward the wild growth. Mustard, he says, mainstream historical fact. In the Galilean countryside, wild mustard plants were considered both a blessing and a nuisance. Their tiny seeds could take root almost anywhere, growing quickly into unruly bushes. While not technically trees, some varieties could reach head height or taller, offering shade to birds and small animals. You step off the path and move toward one of the larger bushes. Its branches are thin but densely tangled, each leaf holding the faint scent of spice. Jesus follows you, then crouches beside the base of the plant. He presses a finger into the dirt, loosening it, and with care, lifts a tiny object between his thumb and forefinger. A seed, so small you almost miss it. He places it in your palm. From this, he says, comes all this. You turn the seed over. It is hard, round, nearly weightless. And yet, he adds, it knows what it will become. A breeze moves through the bushes, rustling their branches. One near you is home to a bird's nest woven with care, cradling to speckled eggs. Even the birds come, Jesus murmurs, watching the nest. He doesn't explain further. He doesn't have to. A quirky cultural detail. Children in Galilee sometimes played games involving mustard seeds, tossing them into cracks in stone walls or at the bases of old trees, then returning days later to see if anything had sprouted. The game had no winner, just wonder. Jesus stands again, brushing earth from his fingers. You remain crouched a moment longer, holding the seed. It feels like a question and an answer at once. Then Jesus turned toward the path again, and you rise to follow him. As you walk, he speaks softly, more to the air than to you. The kingdom of heaven is like this, he says, a mustard seed planted in a field. You nod slowly. It is the smallest of seeds, he continues, but when it grows, it becomes the largest of garden plants, and birds come to rest in its shade. You glance back toward the wild bushes. They don't look like kingdoms, but maybe that's the point. Historians still wonder whether Jesus used such imagery. You recall silently, because it was familiar, or because it was subversive. Was the mustard seed a symbol of hidden potential or of unruly growth that couldn't be tamed? Did people hear it as comfort or as challenge? You look at Jesus. He walks without haste, eyes ahead, yet somehow attentive to every sound around him. His presence feels like both things at once, comfort and challenge, seed and shelter. Farther down, you come upon a woman kneeling near the path. She has a large basket of flour beside her and a smaller bowl in her lap. Her sleeves are rolled to the elbow and her hands are white with powder. She glances up and nods as you pass. Jesus slows beside her and asks, "How much leaven for that?" She holds up her thumb and 2 fingers, coated in pale dough. 3 measures, she says. The usual. He smiles. She returns to her kneading. As you walk on, Jesus turns to you. The kingdom is like that, too. You arch an eyebrow. A woman, he says, who took leaven and hid it in 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. You consider this. It isn't dramatic. There's no thunder or fire, just flour, hands, waiting. But it transforms everything. The leaven works slowly, invisibly, like a whisper that becomes a song, or a seed that becomes shade. You reach a bend in the road where a single fig tree stands, its leaves thick and dark, its roots cracking the stone beneath. You sit beneath it for a moment, and Jesus sits beside you. Neither of you speaks. There's no need. The wind moves gently through the branches, and the scent of wild mustard still clings to your skin. You roll the seed between your fingers once more, then press it into the earth beside the tree. A tiny act, but it feels holy. Jesus watches, then leans back on his hands, gaze drifting upward through the leaves. He doesn't speak of kings, or battles, or laws, just seeds, shade, things that grow quietly while no one's watching. You close your eyes, listening to the breeze, to the hush of leaves overhead. The kingdom, it seems, is already here, not arriving like a flood, but growing like a vine, one tendril at a time. You remain under the fig tree a little longer, letting its cool shadow stretch across your arms. Jesus doesn't rush to rise either. He lies back now, one ankle over the other, his hands folded behind his head, gazing up through the canopy of dark green leaves. "Did you notice," he murmurs, "how the leaven disappears?" You turn to him, unsure whether he expects a response, but he continues without waiting. It's hidden in the flour. You don't see it work, but it does. Quietly, faithfully, you nod. It's the kind of truth that doesn't need decoration, the kind that sits quietly in your chest and makes a home there. A soft breeze catches the fig tree's leaves, stirring them like whispers. Overhead, the sky is a clear blue now, dusted with golden light. The morning is gently aging toward midday. You and Jesus begin walking again, this time along a slope that hugs the edge of a small olive grove. The trees are older here, some gnarled, their bark split like riverbeds, their roots gripping the earth as though holding memory itself. Mainstream historical fact. Olive trees in the Judean hills could live for hundreds of years. They were prized not only for their fruit, but for their endurance. Families passed down groves through generations, and the process of curing olives or pressing oil was often a communal activity. Jesus runs his hand along the bark of one tree as he walks past. "These ones, remember," he says with a smile. "They saw my grandfather's grandfather, and they'll see yours too." You'll laugh softly. The idea of a tree outliving a family feels strangely comforting. As you walk, you hear voices in the distance. Rounding the next bend, you find a cluster of people gathered beneath a larger tree. A few were seated on rocks or low stools, others leaning against their walking staffs. The oldest among them nods toward Jesus as he approaches, eyes twinkling. They make room without asking. Jesus gestures for you to sit beside him. The ground is warm from the sun, and small pebbles press through your robe as you settle in. Someone offers you a fig unwarmed, its skin slightly wrinkled. You bite into it, it's sweet. Jesus looks around the group and begins speaking, not loudly, not with force, but with that quiet cadence that draws your ear close. A man goes out too, so he says, there's a stillness, a leaning in. He scatters seed across the earth. Some falls on the path, and the birds come at once and eat it. Some lands on rocky places, shallow soil, and springs up quickly, but withers in the heat because it has no root. Some lands among thorns, and the thorns grow up and choke it. He pauses, but some, he continues, falls on good soil, and it yields a harvest 30, 60, even 100-fold. You glance at the others. A few are nodding. One older man furrows his brow. A quirky cultural detail. Farmers in Galilee often sowed seed by hand, walking their fields with a bag slung over one shoulder. They cast seed in wide arcs, not always knowing what ground would receive it well. It was a dance of faith, trusting that some would take root, though much might not. Someone in the group finally speaks. What does it mean? Jesus doesn't answer immediately. He looks at you instead. What do you think? You hesitate. The seed is the word. He smiles. Perhaps the seed is the soul, or the hope, or the truth. He shrugs gently. Maybe it's all of them. The group stirs. Someone chuckles. Another murmurs a prayer under their breath. Historians still wonder how much of Jesus' parables were drawn from daily life and how much of daily life became symbols only because of him. Did people begin to see seed and soil differently after his stories? Or had they always known that the land teaches, if one only listens? The group breaks apart slowly, people rising with soft goodbyes and grateful glances. A few linger longer, exchanging murmurs about planting and paths and thorns. Jesus stands last. You follow. The two of you walk once more, now through a narrower part of the grove. The branches here hang lower, and olive leaves shimmer in the light like coins. You break the silence after a while. I think I've been all four kinds of soil. Jesus glances at you. Most people are. He smiles again. That same quiet knowing that feels like both comfort and invitation. You reach a small rise where the grove opens again. From here, the land spreads wide, a patchwork of stone and brush, fields and wandering animals. Jesus leans on a staff he's picked up somewhere along the way. So what kind of ground are you now? He asks. You look out over the hills. The answer doesn't come quickly. But maybe that's all right. Maybe soil, like hearts, changes with seasons. Maybe the work is in the tending, in the waiting, in the walk. The hills below shimmer with olive and dust, stitched together by winding trails and the slow passage of goats, their bells clinking like distant chimes. You and Jesus descend the slope, your sandals brushing the dry grass. For a while, neither of you speaks. There's no rush to fill the silence. It stretches around you like soft linen light, breathable and kind. The parable lingers in your mind. Good soil, shallow soil, thorny soil. You wonder if people ever know which kind they are until something tries to grow in them. Jesus stops beside a low stone fence, the kind that once marked a property line or held sheep from wandering. He kneels and runs his fingers along the cracks where wild mustard grows. These are bold little things, he says, almost laughing. You never plant them on purpose, but once they come, they don't let go. You crouch beside him. The plants are scraggly but strong. Tiny yellow flowers burst like little suns against the green-gray stalks. Mainstream historical fact. Mustard plants were common in Galilee. While not cultivated as a crop, they often sprang up wild in fallow fields and alongside footpaths. Their seeds were among the smallest known, yet the plants could grow into sprawling shrubs several feet, tall, sometimes even tall enough for birds to nest in. Jesus cups one of the seed pods in his palm. It starts smaller than this, he says. So small you might not see it in the dust. He lets the pod fall, but give it time, and it grows loud. He rises and brushes off his hands. You follow. The two of you walk again, now through a field where the wind swirls pollen into golden mist. Bees hum low to the ground, drunk on nectar and the slow unfolding of flowers. A quirky cultural detail. Children in Galilean villages were taught to whistle when walking through fields of bees. Both to avoid startling them and to mimic the soft, steady music of nature. Some even believed the bees would listen. Jesus begins to hum, not quite a tune, but a rhythm, a pulse, low and comforting. You whistle softly beside him, and for a moment it feels like everything seed, soil, sun, sound is working in harmony. He leads you to a tree at the edge of the field, its shade wide and cool. Beneath it sits a small group of women weaving fibers into baskets, their fingers moving with practiced ease. They look up and greet Jesus with warmth. One offers a woven mat for you both to sit on. Another hands you a fig leaf folded into a cone, filled with cool spring water. You drink gratefully. Jesus leans back against the tree trunk. "What do you all think of mustard?" he asks the women. One of them laughs. "It's stubborn, messy," says another, "always finding cracks. But it feeds the birds." The eldest adds, "And its flowers are cheerful." Jesus smiles. "Yes, cheerful." He speaks then, softly, so the women's hands keep working. "The kingdom of God," he says, "is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. It was the smallest of all seeds. But when it had grown, it became the greatest of shrubs and became a tree, so that the birds of the air came and made nests in its branches." The women nod. One of them wipes her brow with her sleeve. Another ties off the rim of her basket. You sit with that image in your heart, the smaller seed, the unexpected tree, the gathering birds. Historians still debate what Jesus meant when he compared God's kingdom to something wild and untamed. Was it a warning, a reassurance, an invitation? Some say the mustard plant, unwelcome and unruly, was his way of saying, this kingdom will grow where it's not expected, not invited, not even wanted, and still. It will shelter many. A basket is pressed into your hands, half finished, its weave loose at one side. "Try," one woman says kindly. "It's not about perfection, just pattern." You weave a row. Slowly, the reeds bend in your hand. Jesus watches but says nothing. He's tracing a spiral into the dirt with one fingertip, as if drawing something only he can see. You pause. What if the seed never grows? He looks up. It will. Maybe not here. Maybe not now. But seeds, remember what they're meant to do. You believe him. The wind rustles, the branches above, scattering shadows across the mat. One of the women begins to hum, and the others pick up the melody. It's wordless, but full of meaning. You hum along without knowing the tune. Then Jesus stands. You and he say goodbye and walk away, your hands still smelling faintly of reed and earth. As you crest the next hill, he gestures to the valley below. Look how the mustard claims the land, he says, and you see it now, patches of yellow blooming through stone walls, crawling up slopes, swaying in the breeze. Not a garden, not a field, but a declaration, something too alive to be tamed. The wind picks up as you walk along the edge of a dry terrace. Below, the land stretches wide and warm, speckled with olive trees, fig groves, and sun-bleached stones. The path narrows ahead, hemmed in by brush and the soft chatter of unseen insects. Jesus says nothing for a while. His silence is comfortable, not heavy, and you find yourself grateful for the chance to listen to the land instead. The soft crunch of sandals on gravel, the call of a dove in the distance, the whisper of dry grass bending under the weight of morning. You pause when Jesus kneels to pick up a broken reed. He twirls it in his fingers, then places it carefully back down. Even that, he says, has something left in it. You wonder whether he's talking about the reed or someone else. Mainstream historical fact. In Jesus' time, reeds were gathered from the banks of lakes and marshes, especially near the Jordan and the Sea of Galilee. They were used to make pens for writing, measuring rods, and even simple flutes for shepherds. The phrase, "a bruised reed he will not break," was known from Isaiah, and may have echoed through oral teachings long before the written scroll was heard aloud in synagogues. Jesus steps aside as a boy approaches from the other direction, herding a pair of stubborn goats. The boy offers a quick nod and guides the animals with a stick and a string of sharp clicks from his tongue. One goat strays toward Jesus, who gently touches its head before sending it back with a quiet word. The boy grins and continues on, barefoot and sandaled. A quirky cultural detail. Some Galilean children learned to mimic the bleats of goats so well that they could lead entire flocks without shouting. These quiet herders became local legends and were sometimes invited to guide communal processions. their silent control seen as a sign of harmony with the land. Jesus watches the goats disappear into the distance, then turns to you. "What do you think makes a thing grow?" he asks. "You shrugged water, son. Soil, all good things." He nods. "But sometimes it's the waiting. You reach a stone ledge where the wind carries the smell of crushed thyme and warm clay. Jesus sits, drawing a line in the dust with a twig. Let's say someone plants a seed. He begins and goes to sleep. They rise day after day, and the seed is doing something, but they can't see it. Not yet. Still, the roots stretch downward. The sprout curls upward, quietly, without fanfare. He looks at you. That's the kingdom too. You sit beside him, letting the dust gather around your ankles. The parable sits in your chest like a breath you haven't yet let go. Historians still discuss how deeply agricultural metaphors shaped the early teachings of Jesus. Was it simply the language of his listeners, or a deeper theology rooted in the rhythms of earth and season? Some suggest the parables mirrored more than metaphor. They revealed the sacred logic of life itself, embedded in sowing, resting, waiting, harvesting. A shepherd's staff lies forgotten nearby, sun-bleached and cracked. Jesus picks it up, testing its weight, then leans on it as if to feel its memory. You close your eyes, just for a moment. When you open them again, he is watching the sky. High above, two birds wheel in the air, one chasing the other, or maybe just dancing. They ride a pocket of wind you cannot feel from where you sit. Jesus points upward. Even they trust the air. You smile. There's a softness to this hour. Just past mid, the heat hasn't yet grown heavy, and the hills carry a hush between gusts of breeze. You realize the day is passing without urgency, and that might be the miracle. Jesus begins walking again, and you follow. The road splits ahead, and he chooses the smaller one, narrow, uneven, bordered by brambles. He doesn't hesitate. You duck under a branch and ask, "Why always the harder path?" He looks back, gently amused. Is it harder, or just less walked? You don't answer. Instead, you watch the way his feet land with ease on stone and root alike, like he's not just walking it but part of it. And you remember a story he once told of the two builders, one who dug deep, anchoring his house on rock, the other who built on sand, quickly, carelessly. The storm came to both. You think about mustard seeds and bruised reeds, broken staffs and fig trees, and something inside you understands. The work of the kingdom, this slow, sacred kind of work, isn't always in doing. Sometimes it's in noticing. You breathe in the scent of crushed leaves beneath your feet. A bee dances near your ear, then moves on. Somewhere behind you, the boy with the goats is probably whistling again, and a ways ahead Jesus walks, quiet and unhurried, carrying nothing but the dust of the road and the parables of his heart. The road narrows again until you're threading single file between shoulder-high shrubs. Each step crushes dry leaves and releases the tang of wild sage. Jesus slows only once to lift a low branch for you to pass. Under then continues on, humming something low and rhythmic beneath his breath. The sound is gentle, almost like the wind itself remembering a melody. Up ahead, the shrubs break open into a clearing, a wide patch of tilled earth surrounded by stones, carefully arranged to keep goats from wandering in. At the center, a woman kneels, smoothing the soil around the base of a leafy plant. Jesus doesn't call out. He just approaches with a calm smile, and the woman, sensing him nearby, turns and nods. "To dry this morning," she murmurs, "but the roots are strong." Jesus squats beside her, brushing dust from a seed pouch at her side. "What did you plant?" She looks up. "Mustard. Mostly. Mainstream historical fact. Mustard plants were common in ancient Galilee, growing wild in fields, and sometimes used deliberately as boundary markers. Though technically a weed, mustard was valued both for its seeds, used in spice, and medicine its rapid, resilient growth. A single seed could produce a plant that spread aggressively, even overtaking fields and pathways if not tended. You crouch too, curious. The woman lifts a handful of small seeds and lets them trickle through her fingers. They fall like tiny drops of rain onto her open palm, barely visible, yet full of promise. Jesus takes one and rolls it between his fingertips, the smallest of all seeds. He murmurs, and yet he trails off, his gaze drifting to the edge of the clearing where a single mustard shrub stands tall, yellow flowers shaking lightly in the wind. Its shade isn't wide, but it's enough for a few birds to rest in. You see their shapes move gently within the leaves. A home, he finishes softly. The woman chuckles. It spreads too fast, they say. Once it's planted, you can't control where it goes. Jesus smiles at that. Exactly. You sit with them a while, listening to the woman speak of seasons past, of dry winters and heavy rains, of seeds that never rose and weeds that grew despite her will. She talks with the cadence of someone who's learned from silence and soil more than scrolls and sermons, a quirky cultural detail. In some Galilean villages, there was an unspoken rule against planting mustard in vegetable plots. It grew too wildly, they said, and encouraged chaos. Children sometimes dared one another to plant it anyway, hiding the seeds in rows of beans or barley, believing it brought luck if discovered. Blooming later in an unexpected place. Jesus thanks her, and she presses a few seeds into your hand. For later, she says, plant them somewhere they're not supposed to be. The three of you part ways, and you pocket the seeds. As you walk again, Jesus points to a distant ridge where several trees grow in a crooked line. That's where I saw the mustard bush first, he says. I remember thinking, it shouldn't be there, but there it was, blooming anyway. You nod, letting your fingers close around the seeds in your palm. The path leads downward now, into the cool hush of a dry stream. Shadows fall longer here, and the scent of fig leaves thickens in the air. The only sound is your footsteps, soft, steady, certain. Jesus pauses where the stream curves around a large stone. He sits on the boulder and pulls a twig from his cloak, using it to draw in the dust again. You watch him sketch the shape of a tree, broad at the base, narrow at the top. The kingdom's like this, he says. Tiny start, wide reach. You sit beside him, and for a long while neither of you speaks. Birdsong floats down from somewhere above, threading through the quiet like a ribbon. Historians still debate why Jesus chose the mustard seed for this parable. Some suggest it was the contrast to tiny, almost invisible beginning leading to unpredictable, uncontainable growth. Others argue it was subversive, a sacred metaphor wrapped in the image of an unruly plant, challenging tidy expectations of faith and order. Jesus brushes away his drawing and looks at the streamed walls around you. What if the kingdom doesn't wait for permission? He asks softly. What if it grows right through the cracks? You think of the woman's words that once planted. It spreads too fast, that you can't always control where it goes, that it finds its own places to bloom. You don't answer, but Jesus sees your thoughts anyway. He stands, brushing dust from his robe. Come on, he says. Let's go see if it's growing where we left it. You walk back into the light. The seeds in your hand feel lighter, nowless, like something to carry and more like something waiting to become. You follow Jesus up the path where sunlight filters through sparse fig leaves, each step accompanied by the crunch of pebbles underfoot. The world around you is beginning to feel more open, fields stretching wider, the hills softening their slopes, the breeze lifting just enough to stir the edge of your cloak. The seeds in your hand are still there, warm now from your grip. Jesus hums again, the same soft rhythm as before, and this time you catch the tune, something close to a lullaby. Perhaps he learned it in childhood. Perhaps it was sung to him once beneath the very trees you're passing now. It carries something ancient, something comforting. Ahead, a stone terrace emerges from the hillside built, long ago, to prevent the soil from sliding during heavy rains. It's empty now, save for a patch of wild mustard that has taken root in the far corner. Jesus walks to it slowly and kneels. You see, he says, pointing, no one planted that here, not on purpose. Mainstream historical fact. Galilean farming families built terraces into the hillsides using stacked stones to conserve water and soil. These man-made levels allowed small plots of barley, beans, or grapes to grow in an otherwise harsh terrain. Left untended, wild plants like mustard and thistles would take over quickly, reclaiming space as soon as human hands withdrew. You crouch beside him. The mustard plant is nearly as tall as you, its yellow blossoms opened wide to the sun, its roots deep in earth that once fed wheat or olives. Jesus brushes his fingers along the edge of a leaf, then pinches one and lifts it to his nose, breathing deeply. It smells like spice, he says, but it stinks the tongue. You try it, chewing gently. The bitterness is sharp at first, then lingers with an unexpected warmth. You understand why some might call it unruly, and yet it's honest. Jesus leans back, arms resting on his knees. People want the kingdom to look clean, well kept, predictable. He glances toward the horizon, where a cloud of birds turns lazily in the sky, but I think it grows more like this. A quirky cultural detail. Some old Galilean folk tales warned children not to speak secrets near mustard plants. They were said to carry words on the wind. Elders told stories of whispered confessions that traveled from one village to another, riding the breath of mustard flowers, stirring mischief or miracles depending on the tale. You smile at the thought, and imagine a breeze picking up your thoughts, carrying them through the hills, like seeds too small to chase. Jesus stands, brushing soil from his hands. Come, you rise and follow, the mustard scent still clinging to your fingers. The two of you walk until the terraces fall away behind you, and the land flattens into a stretch of barley fields, some green, some gold. A few farmers bend low to tend their crops. Others lead donkeys, baskets swaying from each side. They lift their hands in greeting, but don't speak. The air feels like prayer. Jesus pauses beside one field. The barley here is short and uneven, thinned by too little rain or too much wind. He scans the rows quietly, then kneels again. He draws a small line in the dust, places one of your mustard seeds inside, and gently covers it. Let's see what it does, he says with a smile. You crouch beside him and press another seed into the earth. Historians still wonder whether Jesus used the mustard seed to illustrate spiritual growth, social revolution, or simply the strange logic of divine beginnings. Did he mean to challenge power structures, or to offer comfort in insignificance? Some argue the parable is layered, both subversive and tender, rebellious and deeply rooted in hope. You sit in silence beside the planted seeds. The sky overhead is pale blue now, scattered with wisps of cloud that look like bruise. A single bee hovers low to the ground, darting between wild herbs growing along the edge of the field. Jesus draws another small shape in the dirt. This time, it's not a tree, but a bird, a circle for the body, a wedge for the beak, a delicate arc for the wing. What if someone finds this and wonders what it meant? You shrugged. Maybe they'll think it was a child playing. Maybe, he says, and then erases it with the side of his hand. Or maybe they'll know it was love. You stand together, the day pressing forward now, filled with heat and movement. But there's still peace between you, still space to breathe. As you walk again, a shepherd passes on the road, leading a handful of sleepy-eyed goats. One strays near, sniffing at your hand before moving on. The shepherd tips his head in greeting and hums a tune not unlike the one Jesus was singing earlier. The rhythm lingers, soft and steady, like footfalls on dusty paths. Jesus speaks one last time before the next bend in the road. Most people look for signs, he says, but signs come later. Seeds come first. You nod and say nothing. Your heart, like the soil you've touched, is open now, ready for whatever might grow. The road curls gently along the side of a hill, where vines climb low wooden trellises and bees dart in and out of unseen blossoms. The dust underfoot is warm now, the sun having stretched into its full reach, casting long slants of light over everything it touches. You and Jesus walk in silence, and the sound of your steps mingles with the distant bleat of goats and the high trill of unseen larks. Your fingers still remember the shape of the seed you planted. Ahead, the path narrows, bordered by crumbling stones once part of a wall. Jesus slows and touches one of the stones, running his fingers across the edge, worn smooth by time. Walls are strange, he murmurs. They keep things out, yes, but they also mark where something once lived. Mainstream historical fact. Many ancient Galilean paths were lined with low, dry stone walls, used both to separate landholdings and keep livestock contained. Over time, as farming boundaries shifted or were abandoned, these walls fell into disrepair, becoming landmarks of memory more than function. You stop beside him. On the other side of the broken wall lies a field gone wild, scrub and thorn bushes, a few flowering weeds, and one small fig tree, bent but thriving. The sight is oddly moving, something that wasn't meant to survive here. Jesus crosses the threshold of stones and walks into the field. He stoops beside the fig tree, examining the trunk, the roots exposed where the earth has worn away. You see how it leans? He says. That's from wind, but it bent instead of breaking. You nod. There's wisdom in that. He reaches into the crook of the branches and pulls free a single ripe fig, the color of deep wine. He holds it out to you without a word. You take it and break it opens. Sweetness clings to your fingertips, and the scent is thick, almost floral. You'll notice, Jesus says, It grew here without tending, a quirky cultural detail. In the Galilean countryside, figs often grew wild in places where birds dropped seeds, or where old orchards had been forgotten. Locals believed wild figs had stronger flavor but shorter life natures, fierce but fleeting generosity. You eat the figs slowly, savoring both the fruit and the quiet. The field hums with life. Grasshoppers spring unseen through the weeds. A small lizard skitters between rocks. Somewhere close, a pair of quail coo gently to one another. Jesus sits on a fallen log and pulls off his sandals. He stretches out his legs like someone who has walked far and will walk farther still. You sit beside him. The breeze carries scents of warm dust, crushed thyme, and something faintly smoky, perhaps from a distant hearth. The sound of the wind in the fig leaves is like the hush of a sleeping house. Jesus leans his head back and closes his eyes. You ask, "Is this rest?" He smiles without opening them. It's part of the planting. The phrase rests in the air like a leaf on still water. Then he opens his eyes and turns toward you, his expression softer than before. "Tell me," he says, "what do you think the kingdom is?" You pause, searching for an answer that doesn't feel too small. A tree, you try. A mustard seed. He chuckles quietly. Yes, but also no. It's not only what it grows into, it's what it asks of you. You tilt your head, waiting. He continues, it asks you to trust the smallness, to believe that what's buried might bloom. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' frequent return to agricultural imagery was more than just poetic. It may have been deeply strategic. In a world ruled by military force and political might, planting and patience were radical metaphors. They placed power not in empires, but in everyday hands: farmers, bakers, shepherds, children. You look down at your own hands. The fig's juice still darkens your palm, its sweetness lingering on your tongue. The weight at the moment isn't heavy, but it is full, as though something invisible is beginning to sprout just beneath the soil of your heart. The two of you rise again, the sun casting shadows now sharper, stretching eastward behind you. Further along the path, a woman tends a goat near a low hut, its roof patched with straw. She sees Jesus and waves. He waves back, then gestures toward the small garden beside her home: onions, lentils, and a few shoots of lettuce. The woman beams, proud of what she's managed to coax from rocky earth. As you pass, Jesus murmurs, "Every hand that tills also hopes." You walk on, the road descending gently now, and the trees thinning into open land. You notice he walks a little more slowly here, not with weariness, but reverence, as if this stretch of earth holds something sacred that he does not wish to disturb. You match his pace, each step deliberate. Soon, you reach another flat stone wall, but this one isn't broken. It stands whole, low but strong, with mortars still holding. On its surface are tiny markings, carved crudely by someone long ago. A flower, a bird, the shape of an open hand. Jesus touches the carving of the hand and rests his own palm over it. You do the same. The sun leans lower in the sky. Shadows stretch across the fields. The world is gold and rust and quiet. "Let's walk a little farther," he says. And so you do. The road flattens into a pale stretch of beaten soil where the grass grows thin and the stones lie scattered like ancient teeth. You walk quietly beside Jesus, the rhythm of your feet, and is falling into easy time. Around you, the land exhales in silence, the kind of stillness that feels not empty, but expectant like soil right before rain. He gestures toward a low rise ahead, where olive trees cling to the slope in a crooked, silver-skinned line. "Let's stop there," he says softly, just until the light shifts. As you approach the trees, their branches whisper overhead in the wind. The leaves shimmer green on one side, silver on the other, turning over and over in the breeze like thoughts too deep for words. You sit beneath the largest tree, its roots cracked into the ground like veins in old hands. Jesus settles beside you, drawing his knees up and leaning his arms on them. Mainstream historical fact. Olive groves were a common sight in the Judean countryside, their cultivation essential to village life. Olive oil wasn't just food, it was fuel for lamps, balm for wounds, and a sacred substance for anointing in temple rituals. Trees were tended for generations, some living hundreds of years. A boy with a lamb appears in the distance, walking the curve of the hill, leading the animal gently with a string of twine looped around its neck. He hums a song you recognize, soft, wordless, and somehow ancient. Jesus watches the boy until he disappears behind the ridge. "Do you remember the parable of the mustard seed?" he asks, without turning. You nod. "The smallest of all seeds," you say. He smiles, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "But when it grows, it becomes a tree," you finish, "big enough for birds to rest in its branches." Jesus picks up a stone from the ground. It's flat and smooth, like a coin shaped by years of wind and water. He turns it in his fingers. "The kingdom is like that," he murmurs, not because it starts small but because it trusts that smallness. A quirky cultural detail. In some Galilean villages, children were told bedtime stories that began with a mustard seed. These stories weren't always religious. Sometimes the seed became a tree that protected a fox or shaded a runaway goat. The mustard seed stood for beginnings, for what couldn't be seen yet. You look out over the plain and imagine a single seed being pressed into the earth by weathered fingers, a child watching it, a mother waiting, a carpenter whispering the story. "What makes it grow?" you asked. He tosses the stone gently toward the base of the olive tree. "Time, trust, light." And then he adds, "and not pulling it up to check every day." The moment stretches. Somewhere in the trees, a dove calls. Then Jesus reaches into his pouch and removes something small, a tiny pouch of cloth tied with a strip of leather. He unties it and shows you the contents. A few pale mustard seeds, no larger than grains of sand. He pours one into your hand. It rolls across your palm like a question without words. "You don't need to do anything with it," he says. "Just carry it." You close your fingers around it. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' mustard seed parables came from personal ritual. Perhaps he really did carry seeds in a pouch, gifting them to listeners as living metaphors. Though no direct account confirms this, apocryphal texts and oral tradition whisper that he marked his journey not with scrolls, but seeds. A gust of wind moves through the grove, and the leaves dance. Jesus stands slowly, brushing the dust from his cloak. The sun has dropped lower now, painting the hills in honeyed gold and deepening the color of the olive bark to near black. "Come," he says, and you rise with him. As you leave the trees, you look back once. The stone he threw lies still, and the branches shift above it like a canopy of quiet blessings. Farther along the road, you pass a woman kneeling by a patch of soil. Her hands are dirty, her face is streaked with effort, but she hums while she works, pulling weeds, pressing seedlings, brushing dust from pale green shoots. Jesus watches her a long time before speaking. "She won't see the harvest," he says. "Not this season, but she plants anyway." You walk past her in silence, but her song lingers, catching in the folds of your tunic like pollen. The sun now brushes the edge of the hills. The light turns softer peach and cream, and the softest grey. Jesus slows again as the path forks. One way dips toward a village with scattered lights already flickering. The other leads higher, into the hills, where wild thyme and silence grow. "We part here," he says gently. Your chest tightens. He sees it, reaches forward, places his hand lightly on your shoulder. His fingers are warm, and they stay there for a moment longer than expected. "You'll go far," he says, "because you've seen what small can do." Then he releases you, turns, walks toward the hills. You stand there until his shape blends with stone and shadow and memory, and then you turn toward the village. The mustard seed is still in your hand. You do not open it yet. You just feel its weight, its quiet, its promise. You walk toward the village as twilight deepens, your steps slow and sure. The ground is cool beneath your sandals, the dust soft like old linen. You pass a low fence made of woven branches, enclosing a small garden where rows of beans and leeks nestled beneath drying herbs. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries once, then quiets. The smell of lentil stew drifts through the onions, garlic, and something you can't quite place. Maybe the road here is narrower, the houses closer. One has a carved lintel above its door. Another has baskets of date pits strung up to dry. There's a hum to the place, not noise, but presence, life lived in gentle repetition. You feel the mustard seed still resting in your hand. You haven't looked at it since Jesus gave it to you, but now you slip it into a fold of your tunic. Not hidden, just held. Mainstream historical fact. Many first-century Galilean homes were one-room dwellings with flat roofs and shared walls. A courtyard might connect several households, extended families living together, working and resting in proximity. Privacy wasn't prized like today. Community was the fabric of survival. You reach a small well at the village's center, A woman kneels beside it, her arms deep in a basket of damp laundry. She glances up, nods once, and continues scrubbing. Her sleeves are rolled to the elbow, revealing arms strong with use. A clay lamp flickers nearby, casting golden rings against the stone. Evening, she murmurs. You nod in return. At the edge of the square, a group of children are drawing in the dirt with sticks. One draws a boat, another a bird. A third carefully presses a fig leaf into the dust and lifts it, revealing its veined impression. The smallest turns to you, holding out her palm. There's something in it, a tiny pebble shaped like a heart. Do you want it? She asks. You smile. You should keep it. The girl looks at it again, then sets it carefully at the foot of the well. It can live here now. A quirky cultural detail. In Galilean folklore, some believed small objects could carry watchfulness, a quiet kind of blessing or protection. Children, especially, were known to leave pebbles or shells at doorways and wells, marking places they thought needed extra gentleness. The sun has dropped fully now. A coolness settles over the earth, not biting, just enough to raise the scent of crushed thyme beneath your feet. A man nearby lights another lamp, shielding its flame with his hand until the wick catches. His face glows gold, then fades into silhouette. You sit on a low bench beside the well. A woman offers you a bowl of something warm grain, maybe barley, mixed with lentils and sprinkled with herbs. You eat slowly. The flavor is simple and whole. Each bite reminds you of the bread Jesus shared, the fig split beneath a tree. The lamp beside you sputters once, then steadies. You close your eyes. Historians still wonder whether the parables were first spoken in places like this, in courtyards, at wells, beside simmering pots, rather than the synagogues where scrolls lived. Some believe Jesus shaped his stories where dust clung to sandals and the scent of firewood lingered in hair, where children watched, where women listened, where life happened. A rooster calls once in the dark, not confused, just eager you ride. Someone directs you to a place to sleep, an alcove near the wall, with straw laid out and a woven blanket folded neatly. You nod your thanks and settle down. Above you, stars begin to appear slowly, like shy thoughts. You lie back and listen. There is no sermon tonight, no lesson to capture, just the steady breath of people sleeping, the soft shuffle of someone tending a baby, the rustle of leaves caught in an old jar outside, and beneath it all, the mustard seed in your tunic. It's light, but not weightless. You wonder what would happen if you planted it, not just in soil, but in silence, in patience, in time. The stars shift again. You remember Jesus' voice when he said, "You'll go far," but somehow, here feels far enough, because maybe far doesn't mean distance. Maybe it means depth. Maybe a mustard seed doesn't stretch across miles, but years. Maybe a story doesn't travel fast, it travels inward. You rest your hand on your chest and feel your heartbeat. Steady, slow, rooted. The bowl beside you is empty now, but you can still taste its warmth. The fig-shaped pebble sits a few steps away, watching the well like a sentinel. The lamp burns low, and the parable's Z-ones about seeds and lamps and little things that matter hover around you like a soft quilt. You don't need to understand all of them. You just need to carry them, like a pouch of tiny seeds, like a whispered truth in a quiet village, like a story passed from hand to hand. You breathe in the night and let it hold you. You wake before dawn. The village is still asleep, wrapped in the hush of pre-morn. Shadows lie heavy along the walls, and the coolness of the earth clings to the soles of your feet. You step outside and sit on the edge of the courtyard, knees drawn close, tunic wrapped tightly around you. The mustard seed is still tucked in the fold of your garment, warm now from the heat of your body. A clay jar leans against the doorframe, dewed with condensation. A few fig leaves have gathered in the corner, gently trembling with the faintest breeze. You are alone, but it doesn't feel like loneliness. Just quiet, just space, just breath. Mainstream historical fact. In many Galilean homes, people rose before the sun to prepare for work, especially during the growing season. Bakers stoked the ovens, farmers filled their sacks, women fetched water from the village well. Even children had small tasks, sweeping the thresholds, checking the baskets hung high for pests. Do you think of Jesus now? You picture him on one of these paths, somewhere beyond the hills, maybe pausing at a stream or resting beneath a tamarisk tree. You imagine him adjusting his sandals, brushing dust from his hem, looking up to read the wind. What might he be planting now? What field? What heart? You walk toward the well again, The fig-shaped pebble still sits where the little girl placed it, perfectly still, watching. You stoop and press your fingers to it, just briefly, and then continue on. Each step you take feels like part of something bigger, a rhythm, a walking prayer. You leave the village quietly, not running, not sneaking, just going, just as he did. The road curves gently upward, and soon the rooftops are behind you. Before long, there's only sky, pale at first, streaked with blush and pearl, then richer, deepening toward gold. You pause to breathe it in. A donkey brays in the distance. A shepherd's dog barks once, sharp and clear. Somewhere, a rooster joins the chorus, declaring what is already obvious to the light. The day has begun, and you, too, are part of its unfolding. You follow the path that loops along the edge of a dry terrace. Here, old olive trees stretch, their knotted limbs skyward. Some are hollow, their trunks twisted like dancers. Others are thick and solid, branches thick with dew. Beneath them, tufts of thyme grow in irregular clusters. A quirky cultural detail. In ancient Galilee, olive groves were more than sources of oil. They were places of shade, prayer, even legal arbitration. Under certain trees, elders would meet to discuss disputes, bless harvests, or recite shared wisdom. Some trees were known by name and age, revered as witnesses to generations. You pass beneath one such tree now. You place your hand on its bark. It's rough, but not sharp. Cool, but not cold. It feels like the kind of tree that has heard stories and never interrupted. You keep walking. In a small clearing, you stop. There's nothing remarkable about the place, just dry soil, a flat stone, a patch of grass, not quite green, but it feels right. So you crouch down, reach into the fold of your tunic, and take out the mustard seed. It's still there unchanged, tiny, pale, perfect. Jesus never said what to do with it. He just gave it to you. But you dig a shallow groove with your finger, press the seed in, cover it gently. No need for fanfare, no need for a speech, just earth and seed and sky. You sit back and smile. Historians still wonder whether Jesus used mustard seed imagery because of its surprising properties. The plant was common, yes, but it could grow quickly, aggressively, even stubbornly. Some scholars debate whether his meaning was hopeful or cautionary. Was the kingdom of heaven unstoppable like a weed, or humble like a kitchen herb? The text doesn't say, and maybe it doesn't need to, because here, kneeling in the dust, you understand something beyond explanation. Small things matter. They matter deeply. A seed, a loaf, a parable, a goodbye. You remain there for a while, not waiting for the seed to grow, just sitting with the quiet knowledge that it will. Someday, when the rains come, when the sun leans just right, when the world has turned a few more times, you get up slowly, dust your knees, look at the hills again, the fig-shaped pebble, the half-shared fruit, the girl at the well, the mustard seed now sleeping in soil. These are the parables, not just stories, but echoes. You walk again, this time without looking back. The road feels familiar now, not because you've walked it before, but because it belongs to those who listen, those who notice, those who plant what cannot be seen. Above you, the sky unfurls into soft light, not dramatic, not thunderous, just true, just steady, just like a seed beneath the earth. The day stretches out in golden silence, the kind that hums softly behind your ears, like the memory of a lullaby. You continue walking, not toward any place in particular, but because the road is still under your feet and the sun is still overhead. The seed is behind you now. It lies beneath the soil like a whispered prayer unanswered, but heard. You don't know if it will sprout, or when. But strangely, that doesn't trouble you. You've done your part. The path dips and curves through a grove of almonds, their narrow leaves catching the wind like slivers of green flame. You reach out and touch one as you pass. It trembles slightly, and a single petal, faded from last season's bloom, clings to the branch like a quiet survivor. Ahead, a narrow stream murmurs its way down the hill. You kneel beside it, cupping your hands to drink. The water is cool and metallic, like rain drawn through limestone and time. It wakes you in the gentlest way. Mainstream historical fact. In first-century Judea, natural springs and seasonal streams were vital rest points for travelers, especially those walking on foot for days at a time. Communities often formed near these waters, and pilgrims shared paths that followed their flow. Jesus and his followers would have known them well. Small sanctuaries on the road. You sit on a flat rock and let your sandals rest beside you. The dust of the morning clings to your toes, fine and soft. You rub it off gently, then lie back, feeling the stone support your spine, your shoulders, the base of your skull. The sky above stretches wider than your thoughts. You remember the girl from the village, the way she pressed the fig into your hand. No words, no instructions, just trust, just offering, a quirky cultural detail. In many small Judean communities, children were taught the art of quiet gifting, offering bread, fruit, or herbs with no expectation of thanks. It was considered a virtue to give gently, like the breeze, and not seek recognition. The reward was in the giving itself. You wonder who taught her that. You close your eyes. The water sings beside you. The leaves murmur in a language older than words. Somewhere in the distance, a shepherd's flute resounds a high, lilting tune that seems to rise from the rocks themselves. Jesus might be walking still, or he might be sitting somewhere, just like you, watching the wind comb the grasses and not needing to speak. You imagine his face, not stern or radiant, but calm, at peace. You remembered something he once said about the smallest of things becoming the greatest. He wasn't talking about trees. Not really. He was talking about people. About you. You sit up and draw a small circle in the dust with your fingertip. It isn't much, but it feels like marking something. A moment. A passing. The wind picks up slightly, and with it comes the scent of rosemary. You smile. From this height, you can see the valley below, patches of cultivated land, tiny groves, stone homes, no bigger than your thumb from here. The road snakes through it all, and far in the distance, the faint shimmer of the Jordan glows like a thread of glass beneath the sun. You wonder if he's reached it yet, if John is there, if the waters are cold, if the voice that calls from the wilderness is strong this morning, or hoarse from use. Historians still wonder about that moment when Jesus arrived at the river. Some argue he came alone, unnoticed, quiet as always. Others believe a few from his village may have followed. The texts are silent on this part, but something about that silence feels holy. You stand and begin the descent. Each step feels deliberate, measured, almost ceremonial. You're not in a hurry. You don't need to be. The journey is not a race, but a remembering. With each breath, you carry something forward, something planted in you. Just as you planted the seed, you cross another small stream, stepping on sun-warmed stones. You pass under a vine that's crept wild across a broken wall. You see a man walking far ahead, just a figure for now, but his stride is familiar. Not Jesus, but someone like him. A traveler, a planter. You wonder if that's what you are now. You reach a bend in the road and find a small stone piled atop three others. A traveler's altar. No names, no markings, just the unspoken language of footsteps and stillness. You place your own stone there, not for a wish, not for a sign, but as a note in a song only the hills can hear. The road carries on. You follow it, heart quiet, hands loose at your sides, face turned toward the light. The wind comes gentle now, softer than before, as if it too is winding down. The road stretches behind you and ahead, but something in your chest tells you that the day is drawing close to stillness. You walk slowly, not because your body is tired, but because your spirit is full. To your eye, a stand of olive trees shimmers in the light, their live silver underneath, green on to prustle like old paper when the breeze touches them. One branch droops slow, and you reach out, running your fingers over the smooth bark. It feels like skin worn by age and sunlight. You think again of the mustard seed. The tiniest of things. You haven't seen one today. Not exactly, but you've lived it. In gestures, in silence, in the way Jesus split the fig and handed it to you, in the girl's shy gift, in the small stone you left behind, just like others have for years, stacking presents into prayer. Mainstream historical fact. The mustard plant, though tiny at the seed stage, grows quickly in the warm Judean climate, often springing up in untended fields or along roadsides. Ancient Jewish farmers considered it more weed than crop, hard to control once it took root. Jesus' audience would have known its habits well, which made his parable both familiar and surprising. You find yourself smiling at the thought. A kingdom hidden in what others overlook. A truth growing wild where no one thought to plant. You walk through a patch of scrub and thorn, but the way is clear, not paved, just known. The kind of path that doesn't need markers because the earth remembers every step. The sun sits lower now, softening the stones, deepening the gold in every blade of grass. You pause to take in the valley one last time. Children's laughter rings faintly from a distant hill. Somewhere, someone is calling livestock home with a wooden bell. A small cloud breaks open in the sky and lets down a single shaft of light, touching the earth like a fingertip. Jesus would be far away now, but not really. Every time you kneel to plant, every time you break bread, every time you forgive or wait or begin again, he's there, a quirky cultural detail. Some early Christian homes carved tiny mustard seeds into their threshold stones, a secret mark of faith and patience, not as display but as a reminder, a seed sown in stone, a parable pressed into the very place one enters. You wonder if anyone has walked this road behind you yet, if they'll see your footprints and know they're not alone. You step lightly now, almost floating. The road has taught you how to walk without needing to rush. It has taught you how to notice fig leaves curled just so, a thread in the hem of a stranger's cloak, the difference between wind and silence. Historians still wonder how much of Jesus' life was spent walking, how many roads saw his shadow, how many footsteps he took, not to preach or perform but to listen, to pause, to be. There's something sacred in not always striving. You reach the edge of a ridge and sit, drawing your knees up, arms resting loosely around them. You watch as the last light of the day sinks behind the olive trees, casting their shapes into long, quiet silhouettes. It feels like a curtain fallings off, final, yet promising another act tomorrow. You close your eyes, and the earth continues turning. The hills behind you hold the village you left. The path ahead holds nothing promised, but everything possible. And in your chest, a seed you didn't know you carried begins to stir. Just a little, just enough. And now, the road stills. The wind, once playful, draws its breath in quiet reverence. Even the leaves hush their rustling, as if the world itself understands that this moment is meant for rest. Your body softens where it sits, shoulders loosening, jaw unclenched, palms open and calm. The sky above is turning deeper now, moving from gold to lavender, from lavender to blue, from blue to the velvet hush of night. Stars begin to blink into being, one by one, like ancient promises remembered just in time. You take a slow breath, the kind that travels through your lungs like water, rinsing the last bits of hurry from your thoughts. And you remember the fig in your hand, the warmth of clay bread, the steady pace of Jesus' footsteps beside yours. Not every lesson must be loud. Not every story needs an ending. Some just need time. Like seeds beneath the soil, they wait. And so do you. Not in emptiness but in hope. Not in silence but in listening. Let yourself fall gently into this quiet. Let your heart unfurl, like a sapling reaching for light. Sleep, when it comes, will be the softest kind of prayer. And tomorrow when it wakes with birdsong and fresh sky will find you ready. Not because you hurried, but because you stayed. Because you watched. Because you walked beside the one who taught us that the smallest things are never truly small. That patience is a kind of strength. That love, like mustard seed, finds a way. Good night, now. Peace be upon your breath. Peace be upon your dreams. Peace be upon the path that brought you here.